was always kind of taught to dream big and think like a leader.
How can we hack the system?
We are producers to its core. We're makers.
That was that moment where I was like, yes, like this was a big one to put us on the map.
Creativity is messy. Perfect is boring.
That to me is good creative. That to me is success.
You can see talent in people.
We want to go create the next best brand in the world.
This is who we are and this is what we do.
This is Creative's Offscript. Azsa West is a multi-hyphenate artist that has exhibited her work at the Pompidou in Paris, the Art and Science Gallery in Tokyo, and even published a book of her artwork. After 15 years as a creative director at Wieden+Kennedy, she is now the executive creative director at Anomaly and also a film director repped by Where the Buffalo Roam. With a client list that includes Nike, Coke, Google, Disney, Burberry, and many more, her style has been described as spellbinding, insanity-inducing, mind-blowing, and gooey. Welcome to our show, Azsa.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So you had such an interesting childhood. It seems like I've heard many different descriptions of it. Raised in a haunted ghost town, metaphysical graphic designer, skater dad, raised by dolphins. I mean, tell me about your childhood and what made it so special.
Yeah, I definitely had a very unconventional childhood. And I think that has a lot to do with my parents just being two weirdos that found each other and fell in love. But grew up in Ventura, California. It's a little beach town about an hour and a half north of LA. And at the time when I was there, it was more like working class, a bit rough around the edges, but it's still quite charming as well. And it feels like it's like stuck in a time warp a bit. Like nothing really changes there. It kind of stays the same. But my dad was an electrician, so working class guy too. Grew up skateboarding, surfing, and that's where I got all that from. And my mom was more of like the art side of things. She had a graphic design business when I was a kid. And as most people do, she kind of fell into this more spiritual way of doing things in Southern California. So grew up with the whole aura reading thing and horoscope thing and all that jazz.
Yeah, and it seems like your mom had such a big impact on you creatively throughout your career. Can you tell me, like, how did your mom nurture your creativity at a young age?
For sure. Yeah, my mom is probably the biggest source of my inspiration. And I think a lot of that may have to do with the fact that I lost her when I was very young. So she died when I was 13 and she was sick for a very long time. But from the time I was a small child, I guess from first grade through seventh grade, she did whatever she could to pass on the things that she believed in. And one of the things she believed in was staying true to who you are. So when she would see something in me or my siblings that we took notice in or had passion for, she paid attention to that and nurtured it and entertained it and allowed us to kind of explore that. And she was a very creative person. So that was just kind of by proxy, right? Like growing up with a creative person who does things differently, like that rubs off on you. But yeah, I guess like my childhood was a very creative childhood because I was raised by this creative weirdo. So I didn't know any other way. And it's very formative that time too, right? Like when you're a kid. So that was the foundation of the house that was built. I guess that is my mind and ways of doing things. And because she died when I was so young, that really accelerated this creative development in a strange way. Like it felt like it was going through boot camp on steroids, if you will, because she was desperate to kind of pass on all these things that she had learned because she knew she was dying. So it definitely made for a more intense childhood in some ways, but it was very magical too. I learned a lot from her.
Yeah, it's a powerful story for sure. And I think that I even read that you are currently in the process of developing a TV series based on your childhood and your mother's primarily. I would love to know a little bit more about that and how that story is being translated into what you're creating.
Yeah, that's a good question. To be honest, I've been writing this story for many, many years. And I think when you lose a person, the way you feel about it changes over time, especially when you lose them as a child. Like I definitely went through periods where I felt angry, I felt sad, depressed, or I felt relief, or I felt inspired even, or I felt like it was a bit of a joke. Like, I don't know if you know what it feels like to lose someone or if you've lost a parent before, but it is a very strange journey to go on emotionally. And I guess like I've written so many iterations of this idea that I've had based on this upbringing that centers around my mom dying, and in parallel, me also finding out that I'm gay at the same time. The latest iteration now is that it's more episodic and meant to be more like a dark humor kind of approach. I guess that's, inspired by my own personal taste, but also my mom. Like, my mom was a very hilarious person with like a dark sense of humor. So I feel like I've arrived at this healthy middle ground with it, where I'm not using it to kind of process my feelings because it happened so long ago. So now I can kind of look at it more objectively. And I think that's important too.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like such an incredible story. So
Yeah.
multi-layered, and of course it's your true story of your life. I mean, really sounds like an incredible project. So I'd be very interested to learn more about that or see it when it comes out.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know when it'll come out. I think I think this will be the thing that I'll probably be the most proud of out of everything I've ever made. So I'm just taking my time with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so moving on, as you grew up, from what I've researched, it sounds like you didn't do too well in traditional school. Would love to know more about that and like why you think that traditional school wasn't for you.
Yeah, you've really done your homework. Yeah, so I've probably dropped out of like 3 to 4 different colleges. Like, to be fair, I did try. I did really well in high school for some reason, but when it got to college, I struggled with hypothetical situations, right? So you're picking a major, you're picking a career, and then you have all these people putting you in these hypothetical situations with these fake presentations and these fake projects. And it didn't feel challenging enough to me. And I lost interest and I struggled to stay committed to those things and kept changing my mind as a result of that or getting distracted by other things. And in the end, like, where that left me was with learning a little bit about a lot of different things. And I guess maybe in a weird way that worked out for me, because what I realized was that's essentially handy for what I do now, like having a background in film, photography, design, communication, fashion, all these things helps me with where I am now, whereas if maybe I would have pursued just one of those paths, I wouldn't be where I am. So I do consider it a blessing now. Like, at the time I felt cursed and lost and confused, but in a weird way, I think all those choices or bad choices that I made led me to where I am here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I asked because I feel like I had a similar experience, honestly, when I was, especially in going through college. Is like, I dropped out as well. Would finish my degree years later, but I dropped out to start a production company, which was my first company.
That's cool.
And I think I can relate to that, of the hypotheticals, because it was like, I just wanted to go do it in real life. Like, I wanted to just go create a business and just get started. I guess that was my sense, was like, I just couldn't wait to get started. Did you feel some sense of that as well, or?
No, actually, it was the opposite. I was struggling to know what I wanted. And there was a teacher, his name is Gary Cox. I'll give him a little shout out. And I met him in art school. And I remember the day he asked me to stay after class, and he asked to look through my sketchbook. I used to carry these sketchbooks around, and I would create these like visual universes and collages and lists. And like, it looked crazy, but I would just observe things and kind of write them down or tape them into my book or whatever in this very bizarre way. I don't know. It was like, I guess it was for me, it was more personal for me at the time, but he took notice of me doing this in class, and he called me up after class, and I thought that I was going to get in trouble, but he said the opposite to me. And he's like, let me look at your book. And he flipped through it, and he's like, yeah, I don't think you belong in school. Like, I can see by the way your brain works that you need to be doing something else. And I was like, well, what do you have in mind? And he's like, well, there's an ad agency across the street called Wieden+Kennedy, and there's a school there that I think you should apply to. And he's like, it's more of an experiment because it's not really a school. It's basically like an ad agency within an agency where you learn by actually doing things. And yeah, that's how I found out about it. And then the rest is history. Like, the application process was pretty mysterious and confusing.
Yeah.
And intense, but I was surprised in the end to hear that I had made it. And I remember going to the dean of the school and telling him I was quitting to go to Wieden, and he was like, good luck, you're not. He's like, the likelihood of getting hired there is unlikely. And I remember when he said that to me, I said to him, I don't know, something really snarky, like along the lines of like, well, okay, well, I can't wait to prove you wrong then. So
Yeah.
I feel like I was lost for a really, really, really long time. And it took people like that to kind of point out the things that were obvious to them because they, I don't know, they had more experience or they saw talent in myself that I didn't even know about or understand and were able to help direct and guide and articulate those things for me, you know?
Yeah.
And so I feel like I was really able to find my focus because of that. And I'm really glad that I did. You know, maybe who knows what would have happened if I didn't meet Gary, but it really unlocked something.
Yeah, that's pretty serendipitous. You know, that I think it's almost like the White Rabbit, right? Like just tells you about this mysterious school, which of course was the Wieden+Kennedy 12, which you, I believe, describe as a cult disguised as an experimental school. But tell us more about that. Like, what was the experience like and how did it go?
I think it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my entire life. And that was the point. It was engineered by this amazing individual called Jelly Helm. The point of it was to be harder than working at Wieden. And the goal wasn't necessarily to try to find people to work at Wieden. It was genuinely an experiment to take people from non-advertising backgrounds to see if they could do advertising on the Wieden level. And I believe that kind of connects back to Dan Wieden and his philosophy of like how you get to great work is by connecting with an audience in a genuine and in an emotional way. So I think the answer to them was, well, let's find people who connect with people, not like businessy people. So the application process was like very simple. It was tell us something about yourself, and it has to fit within this 8.5 by 11 size envelope. And I took it quite literally. Like I told them, I don't know how old I was at the time, maybe 21 or 22 or something. I think I told them 22 things about myself, like one sentence for every year. And I drew like a picture or something. And they were meant to accept 12 people out of the thousands of people that had applied or something crazy. And I remember they called me and they're like, you're the 13th person. If someone drops out, you've got it. And my family thought it was a pyramid scheme and they thought it was total bullshit. And they didn't believe me. They're like, what is this weird school you're applying to? You've dropped out of college. Like, what are you doing? Like they thought I was completely crazy. But when I had found out I had gotten in, there was no going back. And it was really unclear what it was. Like it genuinely was an experiment and you had to go into it very open. I think that I think he had that in mind when he picked these people. Like he wanted people who were genuinely open-minded people who would be open to going along for the ride. It's hard to explain what it was. There were some rules. Like it was open-minded, yes, but there were some pretty hardcore rules that weren't normal. And the program was 13 months long. And I think in a way, these weird rules helped weed out certain kinds of people. Like the first rule was everyone gets credit for everything, no matter what. And so you were forced to collaborate with 12 different kinds of people. Another rule was you weren't allowed to have a job during this time. You had to do this full time, like no matter what. There were other rules too, like you're not allowed to sleep with anyone that works in the agency. And yeah, definitely it was a bizarre and unconventional experience, but it was very formative in terms of how I approach things and how I get to ideas and stuff.
Yeah. It reminds me a bit of the Teal Fellowship. Are you familiar with the Teal Fellowship?
No, what's that?
So it's Peter Thiel, obviously famous tech investor, but he started this fellowship where he would pick college-age students and give them $100,000 to drop out of college and just work on their idea. And it's to date produced like many billions and billions of dollars. I mean, the founder of Figma that just sold for 20 billion was a Teal Fellow. So I'm curious, looking back at like your group, obviously you've gone on to have amazing success. Do you think there was something about that group of people, if you look at your peers, that they've all gone on to do great things in this industry?
Yeah, I do. I think that they all have. And they're some of my favorite people. And I think they are some of the people who have, for whatever reason, done the best at Wieden and gone on to do amazing things outside of Wieden too. But I think there was this nice balance of having, no ego, but having a very strong point of view at the same time, or this exceptional level of talent, but this ability to be collaborative. So there was all these polarizing elements within these people. I think that's what makes that place magical.
Yeah. Yeah.
It isn't about the fame. It isn't about taking credit for things. It's about trying to get to the best idea that you can and doing whatever you can in terms of what you need to do to get to great work is all that matters. But, with the pandemic, that kind of changed the culture of that place. And I think people are realizing too that your mental health is important. Your having work-life balance is important. So how do you make sure that the ideas, the quality of your ideas and how they come to life is amazing, but that you're also continuing to take care of yourself too and not burn yourself out?
If you're enjoying this podcast, then check out Great Big Photography World podcast, featuring inspiring conversations with passionate photographers from around the world. There's something for everyone in this podcast, with a focus on various genres of photography, editing, creative block, business, and much more. If you want to take your photography to the next level, listen to Great Big Photography World podcast on your preferred podcast platform or on greatbigphotographyworld.com. So you go on from the 12 and eventually end up working on and off at Wieden+Kennedy for about 15 years. Obviously, big news passing of Dan Wieden, who's just a legend in this industry and has impacted so many people. What's your best story of working with Dan or with the team at Wieden+Kennedy over those years?
Oh, there's so many stories. Actually, someone randomly, Doug Sweeney, he just tagged me in a story the other day on LinkedIn. But this is the one that stands out the most. When I first started at Wieden Portland, we were pitching the Levi's account. And at the time, I was a junior art director. And I was part of this group internally at Wieden that they called the Five, because there was five of us. It was myself, Julia Blackburn, Julia O, Mike Giepert, Rudy Adler, and then there were a couple other people that would swap in and out. This boy Matthew Carey and David Nebel. But we were one of the teams kind of working on this pitch. And then there was another team as well working on it. And I remember we really, really, really wanted to prove ourselves. And so we went up to the 6th floor where Dan's office was, not because his office was up there, but because it was the only wall in the agency that was open where we could put all our ideas up. And we just took over the 6th floor. And I remember the day we had the review and we went through all of the work and hearing that our idea was picked. And then the day we went to present it, he let us present it to like the people at the highest level at Levi's because he really believed in us and believed in our work. But it was interesting to hear this from the client's point of view that posted this on LinkedIn. Like even he could see it and he didn't even know our process very well, but he was very impressed by the fact that Dan was willing to let these junior creatives who had never done anything before, like run this entire pitch and present the ideas to them at the highest level. Because for him, it was just about like, I just want to put the best ideas in front of people. I don't care who writes them or where they come from or how they do it. I just want it to be the best. And I think that's a good metaphor for that place. Like you never felt like anyone was above you. Like you always felt like people were there to support you and nurture you and help you to bring your wildest dreams to life. And that was Dan. He was always helping from behind. He was never a heavy hand, but he was there to say the right thing, to make you feel as though you had come up with it on your own.
Yeah.
Or to give you the confidence to put it out there. So, and I think that he created an environment that allowed that magic to happen. Like he would always say, like, this is your place. Do with it what you will. Use it how you want to. Sometimes people took that too far. Like I remember people would draw dicks on the elevator and he would get an email from him every once in a while being like, stop drawing penises in the elevator. Or there was a kid who he had nowhere for his pet tortoise to live. And I remember looking out the window one day and Dan had let him keep his pet tortoise on his balcony. Yeah, it was a really magical time having him there.
Yeah.
It's really cool to see how much he's impacted other people's lives. And
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'll never forget that. It stays with you, And I don't know, I literally grew up there. Like I spent probably my entire career there with the exception of like 1 year at CAA and worked in 4 different offices within that network. And even though they were all very different from each other, like the one thing they had in common was you never felt like you had to stay in a lane or that there were certain rules that you had to follow when you worked there. Like it really felt like each place was your place to do what you wanted within that space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking on that, working in the 4 different offices, it seems like you creatively are significantly influenced by global travel. Why would you say that is one of your inspirations?
I think I get bored very easily. I don't know, maybe I have ADD or something. Yeah, I think I am inspired by my environment. And I have a complicated background as well. And my wife also does. Like she's half Japanese, half Scandinavian, and I'm Native American and Mexican and British on my father's side. We have a son. He's half Brazilian. His father's from Vitoria, Brazil, and his husband is French. So I don't know. I've always been drawn to people who like to travel and who have a different way of doing things, I guess. I don't know what the clean, perfect answer is. Maybe it's my background, my complicated background, but I am drawn to people who have complicated backgrounds. My family is complicated, so that could be.
Yeah. And so you're now executive creative director at Anomaly in the Berlin office. What brought you to Berlin? Was it the job specifically, or you just decided you're going to move to Berlin?
There was like a number of reasons that brought us here. It all started, I guess, at the beginning of the pandemic, when I was finding myself feeling like, I guess my time was better spent helping people and helping to shape an environment that was more nurturing and supportive. Like, don't get me wrong, I loved being a creative director and I felt like I was doing a good job there. But for whatever reason, I felt being pulled in this other direction to help create space and want to help people create the best work of their lives. So when the opportunity came up to do something like this, it seemed like the right thing to do. And we were in Portland for 3.5 years, and it felt like the right time to try a new adventure. My son also has family here. Like I mentioned, one of his fathers is French, and they had this plan to move back to Paris. I think they're going to move to Portugal now eventually, but it all felt serendipitous. Like there was something about moving here that felt right. What do I love about Berlin?
Yeah. What draws you to Berlin? I mean, what do you love about Berlin?
What do I love about Berlin?
And I'm asking because I was just there for the first time and it was an amazing city. So interested to hear your perspective.
I guess it's like, for me, it's about where I was coming from. And I don't know if this is a Berlin thing so much as it's more of a European lifestyle thing, but I love the history here. I love the architecture here. I love the little gold stones on the streets that pay homage to the Jewish people. I love that they don't hide their history. I think there's something incredible about that. And being a Native American person, I wish there was more visibility around that in America. I love that it's like a melting pot here. And there's a socialist attitude. Like there's like a scrappiness and a grittiness to Berlin. Like there's some parts of it that remind me of New York from the 80s. But it's a funny place. It's like no place I've been to before. I love that I can walk and get a cup of coffee from my house. Like coming from Portland, it's like the complete opposite. Like we were literally living in a forest and I had to drive to get a coffee. I love that we can take the train and go to wherever, Copenhagen, Munich, so easily. For me, like one of the things I do love about Berlin is the creative energy here. It feels very new and exciting still. Like even though there's all this history, it always feels as though it's constantly reinventing itself. And you can step out your door and there's always something exciting on to do or see or take in.
Yeah, it's a really unique city. Really, really amazing. And so in terms of your work, shifting into, what you do professionally and also as passion, everybody, I think, regards you as a true artist, right? And I think that that's something that everybody in advertising wants to be considered an artist, but you really are an artist, right? Like you've had actual galleries for artwork. You've had shows where you've hosted your artwork at galleries. You also are a director, filmmaker. Would love to know like how you think of yourself and how you separate art from commerce in terms of your passions and what you do.
I think one of the reasons why I've done okay is because I only did things the way that I knew how to do them. I came into this job very naive, having no experience. Like I remember one of the first presentations I went to at Wieden, I had an internal check-in with Alberto Ponte, who was a creative director on Nike at the time. And I had watercolored everything because I didn't know that you weren't supposed to do that. You know what I mean? Like I showed up to the meeting having watercolored my ideas, and I just sort of continued naively, like doing things my own way because no one had said, don't do that, do it this way. And maybe that was a Wieden thing or an Alberto thing or whatever it was. But when you're socialized to believe that you can do things your own way, you just keep doing them your own way. When you're starting out, it's much more emotional and personal when people don't buy your ideas or they change things. Like it feels really, really bad, right? Because you're having to approach things from this very intimate, personal part of your brain. Like creativity, it's a very intimate thing, expressing yourself. But then you also have to be able to take a step back and let people critique the shit out of it, you know? And then all the while protect the parts that are good or find solutions and when problems occur. So it's a really strange job that demands different kinds of skill sets that you learn over time. And over time, you learn to separate those things. But the one thing I don't learn is how to compromise on the artfulness of it, because that's all I know how to do. And if somebody doesn't want that, then they shouldn't hire me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or I'm the wrong person for the job, you know? I don't think we should pretend to be other people because one, I would be bad at it. I've tried before to be someone else in a professional setting and it doesn't work.
Producers, are you sick of messy projects, outdated calendars, hundreds of email chains, and lost files? Have you dreamed of one tool that can bring your entire production workflow together in one place? Assemble is the project management platform designed by producers for producers, featuring calendars, task lists, call sheets, asset management, and more. Assemble helps industry-leading production companies, agencies, and brands streamline their content production workflow. Try Assemble today using the code Offscript, that's one word, to get your first month free. Learn more at assemble.tv. You are listening to the Creatives Offscript podcast. And so tell me a little bit about your filmmaking career now. Just recently, you were signed as a director with Where the Buffalo Roam. So obviously, making waves in terms of the directing side of things. How long have you been behind the camera and interested in that side of creativity?
Yes, I mean, I've always been interested in it. And I think when you do this job, especially as an art director, in a way, it's like going to film school because you're on all these sets and you're a part of the process for most of it, right? But when you're on the other side, like on the production side of it, there's more steps that you are responsible for. This part of me always wanted to know more or wanted to be a part of more. And I had heard several times before from various directors that I had worked with, they were like, hey, like we've noticed that the way you give feedback or the way that you're thinking is like a director. Have you ever tried exploring that? And there were two director friends of mine. I guess it gave me the confidence to be able to pursue that, or even the opportunities to. Like I had a friend, her name is Paula Morabito. She's a filmmaker from Australia. And I was able to partner with her on a couple things and get into it that way. There was even a Nike client that I worked with in Shanghai that asked me, she's like, what, would you ever consider just directing this commercial for this one project we had? Because of the way that I was thinking and approaching it. Again, like another theme of someone pointing out something that, hey, I think you could be good at this. Have you thought about it, or would you try it? And yeah, I wonder if people hadn't pointed that out, who knows what I would have done or not. But that was how I got into it, was by people pointing it out and giving me the chance. And from there, you kind of just dive in and develop your own ideas. Like I started with music videos and some internal Nike stuff. And after that, I started taking on more.
Nice.
Yeah.
And Anomaly, itself has such an interesting model. I mean, they've created their own products and IP. They co-launched the cannabis company Dosist as an example. What's unique about working at Anomaly?
I mean, the name says it all, not to be obvious or cliche, but I think that was the intention, right? Was to not fit in within the industry and to provide a different solution or approach to things. And that even applies to the way we the way we hire here and the way that we work. Like, it is an inherently more collaborative process, and the lines do get blurry. And I say this to everyone that we hire. I'm like, look, I'm going to be honest with you. Like, this place is not for everyone, but it is for a certain kind of person. And that certain kind of person can do very well here if they are comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think, coming from Wieden, it was a little bit different in that way, where at WK, it was a little bit more siloed in the terms that we worked, which can be good too, right? Like, as an art director, you're responsible for that thing, or a strategist is responsible for strategy. But here it is, the lines do get a little more blurry. And again, that kind of connects back to this idea that an answer can come from anywhere. And it's all of our responsibility to rally around that problem and try to solve it the best way that we can.
Yeah. And now, as an executive creative director, you're obviously top of the food chain. Probably a lot of your role, if I had to guess, is managing other creatives and managing teams. How is that transition from somebody like yourself that really is an artist that needs to create and gets bored easily to now be shifting into more of a role where you're managing other people and responsible for their success?
I like it because I think you have to think about the people as the art. Like, I don't know, it gives me pleasure to see the people that we have here succeeding and doing awesome things. But like I said earlier in the conversation, like, there was something about whatever was happening during the pandemic, like, unlocked this shift in me. I also think it's important to have an outlet outside of work creatively. Like, you need that outlet, like, where you can express yourself fully without having to compromise.
And what would you say that outlet is?
For me, I guess, like, making films and making art, making pottery, playing music. Yeah, there's tons of outlets.
Going back into your influences, what would you say is the most influential film you've ever seen, or book you've ever read, or artist who's influenced you?
Oh my gosh, that's a big question. I don't even know how to answer that. I'd have to think about that.
How about these days? What are you reading? What are you watching? I'm
actually watching some pretty embarrassing stuff, but aren't we all? Like, British crime stories to bad reality TV. I'm excited about the new season of White Lotus. I think that's going to be incredible. What else? That's the thing about me, is like, I'll watch anything. Like, I'm curious about everything. So
yeah,
for me, there isn't one source of inspiration. Like, I find inspiration everywhere.
So aside from art and work, what is something that you're incredibly passionate about?
I don't know. For me, this is personal, because I think everyone starts somewhere, but not all of us come into this on the same level, right? It's not an equal playing field. So for me, equity, diversity, inclusion, all of these things are very important to me. And helping to develop creatives, like, that's very important to me, especially younger creatives who have less experience or who come from underrepresented backgrounds. I would say that's an area I thrive in and feel super passionate about. And I think it's, in a weird way, I feel like it's my duty to give that back, because I don't know where I would be if I didn't have that. Like, there were so many amazing people who helped me along the way, who continue to help me to this day. I think it's important to have mentors, like, even at this level. Like, you're always going to need someone to bounce something off of. So I try to give that to people. Like, that's something I try to do here and wherever I've been, is spend that one-on-one time with people and listen to them or give advice. Like, I just spoke to an art director last night that I used to work with at Wieden, who's somewhere else now, but we still maintain that relationship and we still check in on each other. And I'm still very close to Susan Hoffman, for example, she was the first person who hired me at Wieden. But yeah, I think that mentorship is something I'm very passionate about.
Yeah, so important. So wrapping up, last question. I ask this to everyone, but what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self? I suppose this would be about the time you get this White Rabbit invitation to join the WK12. But looking back in that time in your life, what would you tell your young self?
What would I tell my young self? To have more fun and to not worry. I spent so much of my 20s like worrying how the story would end, or where this would all go. And to the point where I was wanting to be in my 30s. I had grown up with so much responsibility. I guess that I would have tried to give myself more permission to have fun and fuck up more. at least in my personal life. So yeah, if I could go back in time, I would definitely try to do that.
Yeah. Oh, great advice for any stage in life.
Yeah.
So I hope that you're doing that these days.
Thank you.
But yeah, really great to talk. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It was my pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and comment to help us spread the word. You can also find more insider content on the Assemble blog, and you can find me on all channels at Nate Watkin. And don't forget, if your producing team is in need of a project management solution, try Assemble today to streamline your production workflow. Our listeners received their first month free by utilizing the code Offscript, that's one word, at checkout. You have been listening to the Creatives Offscript podcast hosted by Assemble.